Motor Mind.
To fix something. The Silverado has a misfire on cylinder number 1. He changed the spark plug and the wire. Didn't make any difference at all.
Alright, so to start off here, so the customer has obviously tried to diagnose this by guessing parts and just throwing random parts at this vehicle hoping to fix it. I mean, a good start is we need to look at plugs and possibly wires, but I mean, to do it properly, he really should maybe diagnosed it to see, are the plugs fouled up, are the, is the gaps too big, why do you have to replace wires? Were they worn out? Did they have like wear marks in them where they were touching metal and grounding out? Were they broken? Were they old? But just to randomly throw stuff at them, obviously whoever's done that, if the customer himself or another garage or mechanic, then that's just called guessnostics, and they're just guessing randomly throwing parts at a problem without actually doing proper diagnostics and figuring out what the actual issue is. So let's see what Scotty comes up with on this.
So I'm going to show you the fastest, easiest way to figure out what the heck is going on. We're going to start with, of all things, a thermal imager. This Doge phone, a Chinese something, I'm trying it out. It has it built in and it works quite well, as you're going to see. It makes a beautiful thermal image. Well, it may look cool, but you can actually use it for something. Now, first of all, we can see all the cylinders there, about the same temperature and the same color. 338. It keeps telling you it's getting too hot, it can damage the thing, but 330. They're all about the same. Then we'll go to the other side.
The one thing I did notice in that video there, where he was using the thermal imaging camera on that phone, is that it kept having a message coming up saying that temperature too high. So the software obviously isn't liking that temperature. It's maybe not designed for that kind of high temperatures. I can't speak personally from using the Doge Chinese brand phone on how good that thermal imager is on there. I've seen a few videos and where a guy actually compared that to a flare one, which attaches to the bottom of your phone. And I did actually notice in that there was a discrepancy between the two different kind of devices on what the temperature actually was showing. The only thing is so I'm kind of not exactly sure on that. The only thing is I did notice in the video and a little further on is that on the driver's side where the cylinder number 1 is, he's not really getting a very good image. There's a lot of stuff in the way, and he's not really seeing the exhaust manifold very well. And he obviously goes to the passenger side, and there's not as much stuff. There's not wires, not an intake. There's not stuff kind of in the way, and you can see it. But I kind of question on just how good that test is, especially when he wasn't getting a very good image. Also, you're seeing this. Now, if it has a dead misfire, in which the vehicle isn't shutting the cylinder down, because some vehicles, if it has a misfire and senses a misfire in a particular cylinder, it will actually shut down the fuel injectors to the cylinder to not wash the cylinder down or not to dump raw fuel into the catalytic converters. So that test is valid and could work and be all right if it's got fuel going in to be cooling the exhaust manifold, and that's an exhaust manifold where it's got very short runners on it and it goes in. If you had one that had a lot longer runners, like more like a header, then it'd probably show up a lot better. But when they're being so short and being cast iron, a lot of the heat will actually soak up from the other one. So, I mean, you'd have to kind of get really down in and really see where the exhaust manifold goes into each cylinder, and you may actually see a slight pressure temperature difference. But it's Scotty kind of way he was doing that. I think there's it wasn't a very good test. He had stuff in the way. He wasn't kind of getting the camera down in there and really actually getting a proper good view of it. As well as Chinese phones, they're not always the best. They're a bit lower quality. Pardon me. And also I've seen with other thermal imaging cameras, that particular one, there is discrepancies, so I'm not sure how accurate that is. It's not as big a deal, because you're just doing a comparison. But yeah, I would kind of, it's an okay test, in some circumstances. In some ways, it can at least give you a direction, but I wouldn't rely on it.
Out of the engine, and we'll look at that. And that's pretty much the same. It's all yellow and about the same temperature. These things are really handy, not just for looking at exhaust temperature. Say you got an electrical short, you just follow the wires. You get to the part that's hot, you know, that's where the short is.
Just touch on what Scotty said there. That can work when you seeing you can take the thermal imaging camera, go down the wire, and where it's hot, the shortage. That is if you have electrical flow through the circuit, and maybe like where they have a ground that's shorting out to power. Power that's shorting out to ground. Or vice versa. Then, as long as you have flow, but if you have like a break in the wire, or then you're not getting any electrical flow, then that's that test is going to be isn't going to actually. A thermal imaging camera isn't going to show you where the break is per se. Because you're gonna not have any heat in that wire, because you're not gonna have any flow. You're not gonna have any electrical flow. It's broke. It's an open circuit. So it's can work if you're looking for a short to ground or like a short to power, where you're getting like let's just say like you had like a light, like a headlamp, and you put your indicator on, and the light is flashing, then you got flow, then you could probably see where that short is, where you have a line. You'd have to know and say, hold on, wait a minute, there's there's something grounding out that shouldn't be, or something's roped together, and there's two wires touching that shouldn't be touching, and they're causing the circuit, the electrical flow. But other than that, a thermal camera is going to help with that. So he's right on certain things, but on some shorts, as in like a short, it can and can't work. And then also you got to think, if you're in a massive harness, you're probably not going to see it as easily as if you're just like following more open lines. So but yeah, it can work if you're looking for like a short power, and you have flow. It hasn't shorted out. If you have something with shorted power and it keeps popping the fuse, then that's not going to do anything, because it's just going to keep opening the circuit up. So that's very that test that can work to a point. But say if it's touching and it keeps popping the fuse, opening the circuit up, then that test is going to work.
Man, they're really handy for analyzing stuff. And they got so cheap. This particular one came with the phone. It's called InfiRay. You turn it on. You can take pictures of it, and it does spot temperature readings too. So you can tell if one's yellow, one's blue. You know, blue's cooler, but it shows you the actual temperature. In this case, it's not an obvious thing. It's not like it's flooding out with gas. It's not firing at all. It's not an obvious thing. So, next, we'll get to the computer. Okay, we'll plug it in. And while we're letting it control itself here, this was built in Fort Wayne, Indiana in 2004. Now, it is the V6 engines, and unfortunately, they often have a lower lifespan, and this baby has 141,000 miles.
Just a quick comment on that. The 4.3 liter V6 in a full-size half-ton truck, it's a heavier vehicle than what normally, and I think what that engine is actually designed for, which was for the quarter-ton trucks, being the S10s, the Sonomas, and the Blazers. So instantly you're putting the engine in a heavier vehicle, more stress on it, and then normally it being a half-ton truck, if it's used as if you're using it as a V8 truck variant, then you're pushing the engine to a lot more limits, going to generate more heat, stress more parts and items, and that's where it leads to more failures of said items and have more problems with the engines. That rings true with almost any vehicle, no matter if it's your fabled Toyotas that Scotty likes to go on about, Volkswagens, GM products, whatever. If you're stressing an engine or pushing it to its limits consistently, then you're going to experience more failures, and you're going to have need more repairs and have more problems with that engine and with the vehicle. If I said when those trucks came out and they had the V8s, then the V8s were aren't stressed as much because it's able to generate more torque, has more horsepower, and you actually have an additional 2 cylinders. So that's more why if they failed sooner is down to um, just how the vehicle is being used. If it was used for just general running around and maybe just doing some light duty, throwing stuff in the back, hauling and stuff like that, and you're driving it conservatively, then I would bet a penny to a pinch of salt that those engines probably lasted just as long as the V8 variants that came out in that model year and in that model. So I think that statement is kind of obscured a bit because it's not looking at the whole picture. They may not have lasted as long, but it's down to how they're being used and the fact that it's a base model vehicle that was bought as, instead of going for the V8, you're going for the cheaper version, getting the V6, you get what you pay for.
So let's look at the data. We'll start with something simple. It's not going 3,100. It's more like 800. So it moves, but it's broken. Do auto diagnose. Go through all the systems. Here we go. But it's still got 24 subsystems to go through. But it's got a nice back on here. He just bought it as a work truck for $5,000. On the radio code, we don't care about that. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in figuring out why it's misfiring on cylinder number 1. You tried spark plug wire. Spark plug wasn't that. There's a lot of things that it can be. It isn't necessarily the spark. It could be the fuel injection system. It could even be a blowing head gasket or a computer failure problem. So we start with the data. Always start with the data. Now I do notice I can feel it shaking at idle and rev it up a little. It clears up quite a bit. So
the test that Scotty has done there, we're revving it up. That is very typical of a single cylinder misfire. That being a V6, you're going to feel it more when it's at idle. And then when you rev it up, then because the gaps between each cylinder firing is smaller, especially on a single cylinder misfire, then you'll feel the shaking from the misfire go away compared to idle. That if it was on a 4-cylinder, you'd even feel it more because now you have bigger gaps in each cylinder, contributes more to the rotation of the crankshaft. On a V8, you'd actually feel it less even at idle, and if you had a V10 or V12, you'd even feel less and less from a single cylinder misfire, and that's simply because each cylinder contributes less to the rotation of the crankshaft, and there's smaller gaps between when the next cylinder takes over firing and turning the engine, turning the crankshaft over. So that's quite common. Now what he really should have done there is done a crank where you'd have either clear flood, where you hold the the accelerator pedal to the floor, and some vehicles have this. It's called clear flood mode. If your vehicle doesn't have that, and it's quite easy, hold it down. If it starts, turn it off right away. Don't take your foot off the throttle. Pull the relay for the fuel pump, and what you do is just start the vehicle. It'll start up. It'll run for a few seconds, and then it'll shut off because it runs out of fuel. You always just clearing the fuel out of the lines, and then you can just crank it over and then listen, and you'll if the cadence of the vehicle turning over everything sounds about the same, and you'll be able to hear it, then most likely you don't have a compression issue. If you turn it over and give it a little bit of time, if your battery is in good shape, if your battery is really weak, then you might have to have a booster pack or dripper pack or something on it to allow that. But then I would suggest replacing battery. Give it a little bit of time just in case, because it can actually indicate if you have problems with like a lifter, if hydraulic lifter. Sometimes when they're first turning over, they're fine, and then they if you have a lifter that's starting to go and it's not opening the valves up properly, then it'll give in after a few minutes. But also you really hear if you're losing compression of intake, exhaust, or if you have a cylinder where the rings on the piston are starting to let go. So that is a very easy test, just with a little bit of guidance, and once you learn what to listen for and how to do it, it's very easy for DIY. The next one he really should have done is put it into gear, put the park brake on, hold your foot firmly onto the brake pedal, make sure nobody's in the way, and then to gently and press the accelerator down. And what you do is then you're gonna load up the engine. You don't want to go like full bore, but you want to just load up a bit, and then feel for the misfire. Does the misfire get worse, or does it improve? That can give you a very good indication if it's if you're looking for more of a fuel misfire, or if you have an intake leak or something like that, air getting in, or if you're working more of a injector or something like that, or something along those lines, something else that's causing it. And neither one of those tests were actually done. They're very basic tests. Anybody who's got even half of what Mr. Kilmer says for experience out of motor field would know to do these instantly right away. They are basic tests that can give you a quick and easy direction on where to go to diagnose a vehicle quickly and efficiently, and they don't require any tools. So it's I don't know why he hasn't done that. As you've seen in previous videos, I think I do question Scotty Kilmer and his experience and knowledge in automotive repair and diagnosis. I think it's very limited. That's right. So that's my opinion, and that's kind of part why I prove this, is because I do think he's misleading people, and has been doing it for a very, very long time. But please, if you enjoy my video, click that like button, comment down below, and subscribe to my channel. It helps me with the algorithm and helps me to be able to get these videos up a bit more. I do have repair videos. You'll see on my channel as well. And as soon as I'm able to do more repair videos, I do bring them out to try to show how to do proper diagnosis and proper repairs for the DIYer, as I do it at my home, as if I am a DIYer, but I am a trained mechanic and have been for nearly 25 years. But I do update my training every single year, and I do currently work in the field actually for a luxury automobile manufacturer at this moment in time. So let's continue on.
We're going to look at the data after we look at the code. So we'll do diagnosis. We don't care about the radio. He's not worried about that. We care about why it's not running right. So we'll go to the powertrain and we'll see what the code is. Read the trouble code. Trouble code. It's probably the misfire. Here we go. Engine misfire. Last test passed, this passed, and then it failed. Before it passed, and it failed. Now he said he had misfire in cylinder number 1. This is different. This is PO300. That is random intermittent misfire. So it's misfiring all lots of different.
All right, so now Scotty's actually showing where his limited knowledge is actually starting to come in. He's automatically assuming, because his computer, and I do think one of Scotty's problems is that he relies on his scan tool to tell him what's wrong with the vehicle, and he diagnoses problems simply off trouble codes, which anybody who's a diagnostic technician knows. You never ever diagnose a problem on just a trouble code. And this is an example here. All that is, when it comes up there, is how the computer is interpreting the misfires. It may see a random cylinder misfire at time, and it'll come up with cylinder 1. That's what Scotty does do, where he's look at the live data, and then you'll see, oh look, actually it's on just one cylinder. But him jumping to a conclusion right there, going, it's misfiring all over the place. It's all over the place. And the customer said it's cylinder number 1, which indicates to me that he's most likely has had it looked at by a previous shop, or has scanned it and has looked at live data themselves, or had trouble codes come up for P0301. But 300, sometimes that will come up, especially if it's been cleared. If you've cleared the trouble codes, the customer sees through sort of plugs and wires at this. So you probably cleared the codes. But yeah, they will come up sometimes. It's just how the computer is interpreting the data, and that's why you never ever diagnose a vehicle strictly off the trouble codes, because it's interpretation of data and not always an indication of what the actual fault is. And that's why you have to have diagnostic procedures and be able to look into these things properly. It gives trouble codes in a vehicle will give you a direction on what could be going wrong and where to maybe an area to look in. It doesn't tell you what's wrong with the vehicle. Anybody who thinks that, and a lot of people in the industry think that, oh, you can plug it in, it'll tell you what's wrong. No, that's never the case. I don't care how sophisticated a vehicle is. Even up to this point, you can drive the brand new Tesla. It will not tell you exactly what's wrong with the vehicle. It'll tell you, give you an idea, it'll give you a direction. It may help you to formulate and give you ideas what tests to do or what needs to be done, but it will not tell you exactly what is wrong with the vehicle. That's where knowledge and test procedures and expensive equipment comes in. So that's where Mr. Kilmer is starting to fail and show his limited knowledge.
Different places. So let's look at the raw data. We've got live data, engine live data. That's what we want. Start with data 1. They are color coded. We're going to start looking through all the stuff. See if anything looks odd. Short-term fuel trim, both banks. 3, 2, now it's 0. That's not bad. Doesn't seem to be an injector-related problem. That's not way off. Although, here we have something. The long-term fuel trim on bank 1, and he said it had misfire on number 1 before, is -6. It's subtracting fuel from bank 1. It's adding a tiny bit on bank 2, but bank 1, it's subtracting fuel. Some reason.
All right, so now Scotty's looked into live data here, and it's discovered short term was fine, but then short term adjusts quickly, and then long term is -6 on bank 1 and +1 on bank 2. So that's actually quite small and marginal. And then you looked at short term; they were pretty much 0. They're bouncing kind of back and forth, but staying where they should be. So plus -6, it's only a very small amount, really. As I mentioned in a previous video, if you within specifications of adding short term and long term together in each bank, if you within 10%, then you normally, well, you're within tolerance. I said this is not a new vehicle. It's over 100,000 miles on it, work truck. So engine will be worn out a bit. You can have valve issues, valves and cams a bit worn out. It could be, valves could be a little bit gummed up with from oil residue getting into the PCV system, such like that. But the only thing, let's just say, there's been an issue because from side to side. The fact that he's got a misfire number 1, and I'm kind of thinking it's a I wouldn't say it's a dead miss. I think it's a personal misfire. And I kind of have a theory what's going on with this truck, but without looking at it, and Scotty doesn't do the complete test and doesn't look into it further. I think that what's going on with this truck, I'm going to tell you right now, is that I think that it's got a coil issue, and I think it's still kind of firing on one cylinder, which is why it's if you looked at his historic data, it was coming and going, and it's getting a weak spark on cylinder number 1. So I think sometimes it's burning it's enough that the PCM's happy, and sometimes it's not. And I think that's where you're getting the where it's thinking that one side is running a bit rich, is that it's enough to burn the air off, the air fuel mixture, partially burn it, but it's running rich out of a bit rich out of that cylinder number 1, and that's why it's come up with a misfire code. But that would require a bit more testing, and quite honestly, you can do a simple test with just a basic incandescent test light, and just simply do a cylinder drop test, and you'd be able to ascertain that pretty easily. But Scotty doesn't know. Uh, so he probably doesn't know that you can easily do that. It's a simple test. You need a little bit of knowledge, but it's so you don't shock yourself because it hurts. But yeah, unfortunately, Scotty doesn't know, and I think that's what's going on with this.
Too much fuel is getting into bank 1, causing a misfire. Now, I see this all the time. Watch. It's shaking there. Now I rev it up. The misfire is completely gone.
That's funny because Scotty's already said that in this video. He revved it up was a couple minutes ago, and you went, "Oh look, the misfire is gone. Yeah, it's smoothed out." Yes, Scotty, this is what happens. As I explained earlier, it has to do with that when the engine is spinning up faster, the gaps between the cylinders firing is much shorter, so you're not feeling it as much. That's a very common symptom of a misfire. You'll feel it at idle. You won't feel it at higher RPM, especially unloaded, when the engine is just simply sitting in park. So him bringing that up again is it's stupid and pointless. He's already said that. We know that, and that indicates absolutely nothing other than the fact that he's going to misfire at idle. That's the only thing, and it could even be down to what's it? I think it's down to a ignition coil that's starting to get weak and give up. It could even just be a bad connection on the wires. I checked the wires. New wires were replaced. That could actually be it's not pushed in all the way, and I just have to jump a gap, and it's like getting down to the cylinder. That can be another possibility too. It's definitely worth having a quick look, or just even just looking at the new wires. Sometimes you can get new ignition wires that if you went to like the cheap ones and they're not the best insulation, and you can actually have a hole or something, or on the best insulation is jumping, arcing out the side. And I have seen that too, and that once again, that's quite easily the spot where you can have part of the spark is jumping. Some of it's making it to the cylinder, and some of it's actually arcing out to the engine block. So that's another thing just to have a quick test, quick look and see. But and it's just a visual inspection really. But him revving up like that means nothing really for the diagnosis.
Gone. Let's say you have a fuel injector that's clogged or dripping fuel. If it drips too much fuel, it will make it run too rich and it'll subtract fuel. So it could be a fuel injection problem by actually adding too much fuel on bank 1. We'll look further and see what other information we.
If that was the case, you would also have faults for fuel trims. You'd probably have a fault with the bank 1 O2 sensor, as either a fault, either a heater fault, because the fuel would be if it's running too rich, like the injector is dripping, as Scotty says, and it's not compensating enough that it'd be fouling up the heater on the O2 sensor and that'd be able to get the temperature, and you'd easily see that in just looking at live data, looking at the fuel trims, where that wouldn't be able to get temperature, and you'd see the lines would be sitting, and or you'd have just one where it's see there's a fault. You'd have other faults with that, and if it's left long enough, let's just say it was an injector fault, it was dumping raw fuel down into the exhaust on the one side, you actually would end up with a catalytic converter end up getting the damage as well. Raw fuel going there, light it on fire, and it messes up catalytic converters. But you'd have an O2 sensor fault as well as the misfire faults, if that was the case with it. If it was a injector that was clogged and not firing, then you'd actually have your fuel trims would actually be sitting um, rich. It'd be wanting to add fuel. It wouldn't be pulling fuel away. Um, because it would be enough fuel into the cylinder running lean. So the PCM would be wanting to add fuel, and so it would actually go the other way around. So that's incorrect on what he's saying there. That's not the case. I also like to point out that if it's the other way around, and the fuel injector was sticking open and leaking fuel in, you would actually have a hard start issue, because the end that fuel injector would actually be causing half the engine, the fuel pressure in that one side, the fuel rail, to lose pressure. So it actually would be a hard start issue. So the customer's complaint would probably not only be the misfire, but also be a hard start. And that would be simply because the fuel injector is sticking open, as Scotty presumes, but actually has no evidence it doesn't prove anything. And then you'd be losing fuel pressure in the line, because it'd be one line feeding the engine from the fuel pump, leading up, being the system, and then it would be losing fuel pressure. So you'd have to build fuel pressure up, but you'd have a hard time because you have one injector that'd be dropping fuel pressure down. So that's another case in which another symptom that isn't present in this vehicle if the injector was actually sticking open and having an issue. So I really, really highly doubt that there's actually an injector issue with this vehicle, because it actually has zero symptoms of an injector being stuck shut and zero symptoms of an injector being stuck open. So Scotty's assuming stuff, but his knowledge is so lacking that he simply doesn't even know what other symptoms would be. He's got a misfire, an intermittent misfire on cylinder number one, and because he has no idea what's going on, he's just assuming, oh, it must be an injector, because these parts have been replaced at one spark plug and probably one wire, an ignition wire. But then, what quality is the spark plug? Is it gapped properly? And is the coil actually firing properly? Because it seems like this vehicle had parts thrown at it, but actually it was never diagnosed properly to know why. Why are you throwing parts of the vehicle for a problem without having an idea? And a lot of customers do that. They'll throw something cheap and easy, or throw a plug at it, costs a couple dollars, or throw a spark plug wire at it, or a set of wires at it. They cost maybe a cheap ones from AutoZone over maybe $20 or something like that. Okay, it's cheaper than another mechanic. I get why they do that, but it is guessnostic. Sometimes it works and customers are happy, and sometimes it doesn't. This is one of those cases that it needs proper diagnostics. But an injector, if it was sticking open, you'd have a hard start issue, because you'd be losing fuel pressure on startup, and you'd have to need time to build that up and inject. Pardon me, and the fuel pump, especially in an older truck, it would need time, and maybe the fuel pump's a bit worn out, and do a week after time. That could be a problem. So I do highly doubt that, and that's why you'd have a hard start issue if it was sticking open.
Now you can see on bank 1, the average injector is 4.14 milliseconds. On bank 2, it's 4.49 milliseconds.
All right, what Scotty's talking there, and if you look closely at the live data and stuff like that, it's not even that much of a difference. But he's talking 4.41 to 4.9 milliseconds. Okay, he's talking 1/10 of a millisecond. Like, he's talking tenths of a millisecond. So he's talking what? Let's just say those two numbers there. So you're looking at 0.8 of a millisecond, right? 0.8 of a millisecond. All right, that is such a tiny amount that could be down to, and it's so insignificant. It's really, he's just looking for something, anything in the data, just to clamor up. Oh, look at this, that's out by, and it's only at that point, if we look at it's actually not even that big of a gap. It's I watched the live data a few times, and you're only actually talking maybe maybe 2 or 3 of a millisecond on average. It moves around a bit, because each time injector, the computer's always just adjusting that bit. We're only talking tenths of a millisecond. That's so small. It's it's ridiculous. That's definitely not it. It's very, very, very tiny. Okay.
Seconds. Now, the computer tries to make it work perfect. Bank 2 is the one that wasn't subtracting fuel. Bank 1 is subtracting fuel, but Bank 1 has an average of shorter spray time. See, now it's 3.97. This is a longer spray time. This is the one that has more problems. You would think this is spraying less, this is spraying more, but the one that's spraying less is...
Of course, Bank 1 is going to average a shorter spray time. It has a misfire, and the computer is compensating for it, probably by either shortening the amount of fuel going into number 1, or might actually be cutting that cylinder off completely. Some vehicles have it in the programming. If it detects a misfire on a particular cylinder, it'll shut down the injector to that cylinder to stop raw fuel being dumped into the exhaust and getting to the catalytic converter, and then damaging and ruining the catalytic converter. And so it'll simply shut off that cylinder, fuel going to that until, and flag the code. And so that's just to stop from any more damage being done to the O2 sensors or to the catalytic converter. So yes, Scotty, it is shortening the spray times, and it's doing it because there's a misfire on that bank. It's called computer programming, and this is what automotive engineers are paid to do. And when it works, there's a reason for that, as I just explained, is to save from damaging the catalytic converters and fouling out the O2 sensors and stuff like that. It's mainly to stop from causing catalytic converter damage. So yeah, it's a shorter spray time for a reason.
Actually running a bit on the rich side is subtracting fuel. Easily could be a problem with the injectors on that side of the engine, because you'd think they're firing for a shorter period so less fuel would go in. Well, it's deliberately making them fire that if it has a leak in injector,
or if it has a misfire on a cylinder that isn't burning as efficiently as it would like to see, and so it's pulling fuel away to allow, so because if there's too much fuel, if you're getting a weak spark, then it's not able to ignite the full air fuel charge, so it's going to pull fuel away to make it leaner and have which will then boost up the temperature in the cylinder slightly, because a lot of people don't know this, but internal combustion engines, especially modern ones, they actually, even on gasoline vehicles, it actually starts to combust the air fuel charge with just simply the heat and the compression of the cylinder. The spark is really there is to make sure that the combustion process is efficient and complete. But it actually does start to burn and ignite simply from the compression of the engine and the heat of the combustion chamber. So it will pull that back, but then it'll cause the heat to go up a bit more. You have a bit more air, and the air heats up a bit quicker because the fuel will actually cool the cylinder, and then they would allow. So that's why it does that. So he's saying that it is a bit off. So he's not. And where he's going with this, I can tell you right now, is that he keeps banging on these injectors, and he's done this in several of these videos lately, and it's because he's pushing a fuel cleaner is what he's wanting. He's I don't know if he's got a bit of vested interest, if he's bought some shares in this company. This is one particular company that he's pushing. He's pushing his snake oil once again. Scotty loves doing this. He likes to push these cleaners are miracle cleaners. Oh yes, put this injector cleaner in, it'll solve all your problems. And he never actually diagnoses the problem correctly. But yeah, throw this stuff in your tank, cleans it up perfectly and make your car run like new. Just put the stuff in. In fact, he's got videos on that saying how to make my cars run 400,000 miles. Oh, I dump this stuff in here, and I put this stuff in the fuel, and I put this stuff in the oil, and I put this stuff in the coolant, and yes, my cars will run forever. And all he's doing is he's just pitching stuff. I do think that he's got some a bit of investment in these companies, and he's using his platform to sell them. But he's claiming he doesn't because he wants to claim to be the honest mechanic, which he isn't. But that's where he's going with this.
Or injector that's kind of dribbling along, and it thinks, oh God, it's getting too much fuel, I'll fire it for a shorter period of time. That's how it makes it rich or lean. It makes the injectors fire for a shorter period of time, so less fuel is injected. And that's the side that's subtracting fuel. So that side of the engine, definitely something squirrely.
All right, on that note there, I don't think Scotty exactly knows how fuel injectors work. So I'm just going to kind of give a quick rundown, try to keep it as simple as I can. How injectors work is that you have your fuel rails. You have a fuel pump, fuel lines, provides pressure to the rail. It'll be normally a regulated pressure of X amount. The injectors sit there, fuel is sitting out there, and it uses a coil. And what happens is the PCM will send a signal to that. It'll energize the coils in there, and it moves something called a pintle. It looks like a little needle kind of thing. It sits in the end, and it'll open that port up, and does it very, very quickly. This opens up, and you see this thing, and it kind of pops up or pops, depending on how it's designed. Usually pops up, and it'll allow the injector to fire real quick. So it goes dunk, 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 like that, and that's what it is. It's just sending this little electrical pulse, and it's moving this pintle. So if the vehicle can control the injectors, most modern vehicles can, and this one here may, 2004, it may have that. If you can it'll have individual control of each injector, so it'll know how much is opening and closing, and this kind of sounds like what this is doing. I'm not an automotive engineer, and it's been a while since I worked on 4.3, but yeah, that'd be even the Vortec as well. So, sorry, think about that for a second. So that being said, it will, if it has control of that, it will know if that pintle is opening and closing. And if not, it actually will flag an injector fault, and it can it'll try to shut the injector down. And then that's where you can have, if you have issues and stuff, there's still fuel going through there. So you'll have injector faults. The computer can kind of test and sense these things. And there's a way, if you suspect you have an injector fault, then there are ways of testing it. Now, I know one of the best ways where they do it is to use an oscilloscope, and you can watch and you can actually see where the amps, it'll rise up. You'll see the pintle hump. That's where the pintle moves, opens and closes. It'll go up and come down. Another way to do that, if you think this is jamming up a bit and stuff like that, normally injectors don't seize open because fuel is a very good cleaner and it'll actually keep it clean. They tend to seize shut. And that's if it's been left for a long time, hasn't been moved and stuff like that. I've seen this happen. People have installed junkyard engines with had the fuel rail and everything in there. Injectors been left that long closed. They've stuck shut, and you can sometimes get a little tap and stuff like that, and open them back up. Again, to move again. And it's just freeing them up because they've just been sat in there and it has varnished. They don't tend to stay open unless you're running some really dodgy fuel through there, some dirty fuel, and something gets jammed in there. Something has made it past, or you've had like something in line. You've not, your fuel filter has failed. Maybe you've had something, a fuel pump or something that's gone down, and it's caused put crap and stuff into the line. Or you've ran like some really, really dodgy fuel that's had a lot of contaminants in it. And or I have seen where it's if you've had fuel sit for a very long time or had really low quality fuel and it's had water in it, and then you live in a very cold area, and it's and you can get water in your fuel and stuff like that. Um, that's here. That's all that if you're buying really, really cheap fuel or using really cheap low quality fuel, then it can cause problems. But if you're running decent fuel, they have cleaners in them nowadays. Um, Almost every major franchise fuel station, they get them from there's only a few manufacturers and places that they get them from. I worked as a kid at a supermarket petrol station, and we got it at a gas station, and we got our fuel from the same place from the big brand gas station down the road. We got from, and we got it from one of the big uh, refineries. So it was the same stuff. But yeah, that tends to be the kind of case. What he's saying there is no, if the vehicle's got control and the PCM and it's not, and um then it's probably not sticking open, or maybe even not even sticking shut. But from I'm looking there, and from his live data stuff like that, from seeing, it's that's not the case. He's thinking it's sticking open. If you're sticking open, you'd have a lot of other a lot more issues that would point you in that direction, and where further testing would need to be done. But he's not having that and not seeing this, so he's just guessing. It's just simply a guess. Just to make sure to add to that point, if the injector is sticking open, then you'd have a hard start issue, as when they shut the vehicle down, the fuel pressure would drop off quickly. It also would flood that cylinder with fuel, and would either wash the cylinder down. So if the injector is sticking open, you'd actually would see if your oil level be gradually increasing because you'd have the cylinder washing down. Which, if you see when you see later on when he does his injector issue, not injector, he does his compression tests, which is a dodgy way doing a compression test, and I don't recommend it. Do it properly, and I do explain this a little further. Be washing that cylinder down, and also the way he does compression tests, he doesn't disable the fuel system, and so if that injector is actually being shut off by PCM, then it's going to cause different compression in that cylinder compared to the other ones where they're getting fuel, you get an air fuel charge, and fuel is actually going to cause compression to go up. But if it was sticking on, you'd have a hard start issue because that injector would be causing fuel pressure to drop off drastically, quickly, and then you'd have a hard time building fuel pressure up quickly because the fuel pump's not designed to be compensating for the fact that it's losing pressure as soon as it's pressurizing that side of the engine. So like I said, just to reinforce this, if the injector was sticking open, there'd be other symptoms. Primarily one of them would be a hard start issue, which is never expressed in this. Scotty never says that, and as far as I know, there's no customer complaint of a hard start issue with this vehicle. So just to reinforce, I don't think that is, and because there would, if it's open, it'd be causing a problem with a hard start issue, as well as a fuel, the oil level be raising slightly from the cylinder washing down, and also there'd be other issues as well with the O2 sensors claiming that there's a running rich on one side, and you'd even see that in the live data where the if you revved it up, that it would stay rich a lot longer than it should do instead of going back to going to closed loop. And probably heater issues as well, because the fuel will be cooling the heater, it wouldn't be able to get the temperature. So that's some of the main ones you'd see, which you don't see any of those on this vehicle, and that's why unfortunately Scotty doesn't know this stuff. He's very, very limited on his diagnosis, and I think it's because it comes down to it, the man just doesn't actually know modern engines or how to diagnose them properly. He's very simple. He's only maybe slightly above a lube tech, and that's about it. That's as far as his knowledge goes. And I've proven this time and time again. I'll continue proving it because I do think the man's a fraud. So, but yes, there you are.
So let's look at fuel trim. There's more data we can look at. And again, bank 1 is firing a shorter period of time than bank 2. Now let's look at misfires. Since it's misfiring, we'll look at that data. The misfire is cylinder number 1. It's showing 18, 20 misfires. All the other cylinders are not showing any misfire. So even though it had random intermittent misfire code this time, it's only cylinder number 1 is the one that's doing the misfire. And we look at the history, 50,457 misfires. The others are just random. We don't.
Just like to point out something real quick here, and Scotty just admitted that he had a code for random cylinder misfire, and in his history, and he fully admitted he's got random cylinder misfires. So he's saying, "Oh, we don't care about that." Yes, number 1's causing the main issue, and I think it's because the driver in the coil pack on that cylinder is starting to go. And I think the other ones are also well, the driver number cylinder 1 is going, or is gone. It's weak. And I think the other ones are on their way. I think the coil pack needs to be replaced on this vehicle, and that's what the fault is. And even if you look at it, it's got random cylinder misfires in the other cylinders, and you had a code for random cylinder misfire. And obviously, it's a history code because they're still working most of the time, and probably after so long, then it'll put the DTCs, it'll put it into a history code. But it's still bringing so because they're always doing it. It's random cylinder intermittent misfires on all the other cylinders, and number 1 it's got a constant misfire. And like as Scotty just admitted, is that the code matches up to the live data. And he goes, well, we don't care about that. Once again, folks, it just shows his limited knowledge and just how poor quality of a diagnostic technician Mr. Kilmer actually is.
Don't care about them. You know it's only cylinder number 1 that's doing all the misfiring. It's the front one. So it could be fuel injector's dirty, could be the fuel injector's bad, or the worst thing, which unfortunately these engines are notorious for, is a head gasket that's starting to blow on that particular cylinder.
I know he's guessing and thinking, and I think he's leaning towards, could it be that cylinder if the head gasket's going? If the head gasket is starting to fail on that cylinder, and then you'd either be losing coolant, maybe burning, entering the combustion chamber. In which case, then you stick a borescope down on the cylinder, and you'd see the engine that particular combustion chamber be very nice and clean because it's been steam cleaned by coolant and water. You can pull the plug out, and the spark plug would be wet and smell of coolant because its coolant doesn't actually burn all that well. You could actually have the white smoke at the back. You could also have, let's see if it's not entering, if you have compression going into the cooling system, well then you could do a sniff test where you can actually get a cheap kit where you can see if there's any hydrocarbons or any exhaust gases in the cooling system, as well as you could actually sit and watch and see, would see bubbles going up into the cooling system, or you start the vehicle up and the run, even if it's not even hot, and put your hand on it, you'd feel pressure start building way too quickly, and then then what's happening is that compression gases are entering into the cooling system, building pressure a lot faster because obviously you have a compression going in there into the cooling system, and you'll have pressure a lot quicker than you should. So that being said, so there's tests. If you think that way, then you think it's something major. It does require a little bit more investigation. Some stuff's very quick and easy. Ask customer, do you find that you have to top the coolant up every once in a while? Customer says yes or no. Double check, make sure there's no external leaks. Then you can think, okay, it could be this. Look further into it and confirm your suspicions. If it's in the combustion chamber and the coolant's burning off, or if you think the compression gases and compression is going into the cooling system, then you can check and do a simple test to see if that's the case and that's going on, and without any disassembly. Most disassemblies maybe pulling a plug out if you want, but Scotty's just guessing. He doesn't do that.
So, first we're going to do a compression test. We'll take out the #1 spark plug here. So let's look at it. First we're going to analyze it. And you can see the white's still white. It hasn't discolored. It hasn't driven it much. But it's not covered with burnt carbon or anything. That's a good sign.
Alright, so I stand corrected. He just pulled on the spark plug on this. But his little comment on it doesn't have burnt carbon on it. If it was a head gasket problem, it wouldn't have burnt carbon. Because as I said before, if coolant and water and coolant is entering into the combustion chamber, it'll actually have the opposite effect. It'll actually clean the combustion chamber, and you look inside and it'd almost be shiny and look quite clean because it's essentially being steam cleaned. And if you look the next one down, the next one would look a little more dirty, a little more carbon built up and stuff inside, but it would look normal. Then you go, okay, yeah, it's coolant's getting to the #1 cylinder. You have a head gasket leak. Also, I look at, if you had a lot of carbon on there, if you had a fuel injector that was leaking, then you'd pull the plug out. It would smell of fuel, and you actually make carbon up because you'd be running. As you said, he thinks that's running rich. He's trying to pull fuel away. So then that cylinder would be running rich, and then to that cylinder would be fuel soaked. And that spark plug would be fuel soaked and even maybe carboned up if depends how long it's been in there for. That's never indicated, so I don't think that's the case. So I think so far he thinks injector's leaking down. It's not. He thinks, oh, head gasket's leaking, but it's not. There's nothing indicating that. So I think this once again he's just guessing. Pardon me. I mean, he's guessing with no evidence whatsoever and nothing. And so far he's trying to claim this and that, but he's not finding anything of sorts to indicate that's the case and that's what's going on. I'd also like to just draw back to the attention of Scotty's live data, whereas he was saying before that the Banks 1 fuel injectors is actually he thought it was like it's pulling fuel away and is shortening the injection time. If that was the case with the head gasket, if he thinks head gasket is going or thinks that side, then it actually have to do the opposite, because the vehicle would think it's running probably a little bit too, you think it'd be running a little bit too lean, so it'd actually be adding, because that cylinder would be losing compression, be losing the air-fuel charge a little bit, or if it had water going in, then obviously it's not burning so well, so the vehicle would most likely actually add fuel instead of take fuel away, because it would be thinking that the vehicle is not running right, and if air-fuel charge isn't proper on that side. So just to reiterate, from his live data, it would actually have the opposite thing. He's going to try to say it's low in compression on that side. If it was low in compression on that cylinder, the vehicle would actually be adding fuel to compensate for that, not taking fuel away. So once again, his live data contradicts what his diagnosis is on this vehicle, and that's simply because Scotty can't interpret the live data properly, and his diagnosis and his diagnostic skills are extremely lacking.
It looks like it normally should look, and when I smell it, it doesn't particularly smell of raw gas or anything. So we're going to do a compression reading of this cylinder. And since the owner's here, it's easier. We're just going to use the one you push, and he's going to...
As I said before, if you had simply just done the quick and easy crank it over and either disable the fuel system through either push the throttle pedal to the floor and do the clear flood test, or quickly pull a relay for the fuel pump, and then just crank it over, you'd know if you had a compression problem just by simply listening to it, and wouldn't have to do that. Now what he's going to do here, because the owner's there, is he's going to use that little end that has a little rubber thing you have to try to push it on. I don't like using those, and I don't like using those for a few different reasons. For one, it relies on you have to try to reach your hand in and try to hold it on, and you're trying to get a good seal, and then have the engine crank, and if the engine's hot and stuff like that, obviously you get into hot exhaust manifold and stuff is in there. Also, they said you are relying on how good of a seal are you actually getting with that. These rubber ends aren't always the best. As you can see, it's a bit short, and then how much pressure you're putting, and it's not very accurate, because you could hold, maybe get a good seal on one side, and then maybe not quite get on the other side, and how hard are you pushing and reaching in. I've never liked using those. I would prefer to use one that threads into the spark plug hole. You can know how tight it is. You know how tight you get pretty. You got a good seal, and then crank it over and watch the compression. You do that, and once you watch the compression jump up, and you can actually watch and see if it holds or if it starts leaking down. If it's leaking down, then you might have a valve issue, or you can have even issues with maybe some rings or something like that not holding compression and stuff like that. What he uses that is it's in there. I know it's in there for people to do quick something, but it's a very inaccurate way of doing a compression test, and I don't think it's very good. And as for a man who claims he's got 50 years experience and all this and such honest and good mechanic, it's a very shoddy, poor workmanship way of trying to do this. And I think it just shows the level of aptitude and level of quality that Mr. Kilmer actually has.
Crank it and I'll push it in. So push it in here. Okay, crank it over again.
All right, I do have to comment on this here. He's doing a compression test wrong. You disable the fuel system when doing a compression test on a vehicle. And why is because, one, you're having fuel added into when you're doing the cylinder. Fuel will obscure the compression numbers. You're actually just looking to see how much compression you put in fuel. It'll wash the cylinders down. Because he's pulled the spark plug out, and so it's not igniting. It's just being dumping raw fuel in there, and now it'll obscure because it actually will start pushing past. It'll wash the cylinders down, and then it'll allow compression to go past, because you're not getting the seal of the oil on the walls. Also, you want to turn over more slower using the starter motor. When it turns and it starts spinning up faster than your compression numbers, the gauge, one, is going to start spinning faster. He's not going to hold it on as well. And two, that gauge isn't going to be able to keep up as much, and it can cause problems. Always disable the fuel system when doing a compression test, so that you can get the nice full strokes up and down. It's going too quick, and you're not going to get the accurate numbers and the very good numbers. So you'll hear this, the vehicle tries to fire up. All he has to do is pull the relay for the fuel pump, and before you're even done all this, pull the relay for the fuel pump, start the engine, let it run. It'll run out of fuel. Fuel pressure drops. Then you can do the compression tests, and get accurate readings, and it be done properly, and actually know what's going on with the vehicle. And then down the road, if you do think you have an issue with it's a valve issue, then you can do a wet compression test instead of a dry compression test. Which wet compression test, you use a small amount of oil that you put in a combustion chamber, and then watch and see if it's the compression what it hits compared to the dry, and also if it holds. So he's doing the compression test wrong. Mr. 50 odd years of being a mechanic, and he can't even do a simple compression test, which is stuff that I was doing when I was a first year apprentice. The stuff I was doing when I was before I even went into the field. So it shows just how competent the man is.
Okay, now looking good. Okay, it's only 90 pounds, so let's check another cylinder. Realize compression tests are relative. These aren't extremely accurate for the actual PSI, but it's relative to itself. It's going to get, say they were all 90, you'd know, well, it's worn, but that's not the problem. We're going to check another cylinder and see what that pressure is. So we'll go to the other side and we'll check the pressure on this side. Again, we'll pull out a spark plug. That was a fun job. This one's been in there quite a bit longer. Now you can see it's still a normal color. It's not outrageous. It's older than the other one is, but it's not particularly foul with carbon, and the white's white. It's as it should go. But we're going to check the pressure now. We have like 130 pounds. Now he's not losing coolant. It doesn't overheat. So This is just plain wear inside. I can't say truthfully whether the head gasket's starting to leak or the piston rings are worn, but regardless, the engine isn't sealing like it's supposed to.
Really, so Scotty thinks that an engine that's all the pistons have all done the same mileage, they've all run the same oil, all run the same fuel, they've all done pretty much all the same revolutions, strokes up and down in the same block, on the same crankshaft, and one cylinder is a lot. There's got to be a reason. Why is that cylinder losing compression? I don't think I've ever seen where just one cylinder is dead down to rings being worn, without there being an underlying reason for that. Underlying reason being that the cylinder, when the head gasket's gone and is leaking out that way. That's normally, if you want to see that. Like I said, I do highly question his test method with using the compression gauge and just trying to push it on there, because it's, where he's done it, and if you do look on that one side, there's quite a bit of stuff that's in the way to get into the to reach in there, as well as and then also what he used to push on instead of using the one that screws in, which isn't that big a deal. You can screw them in pretty quick and easy, and you get much more accurate numbers and as well as I said, doing a relative compression, you can simply just do it by listening by ear and listen to the vehicle turnover and know if it's if there seems like the cylinder is dead or low in compression. It's not that hard. But yeah, I would think that he's going to try to think that the rings are worn, but I highly doubt the rings are worn on just that one cylinder without there being a reason. And I would think that the most likely reason would be maybe the head gasket is starting to wear on that one side. But then they claim that it's not losing coolant and not overheating and blah blah blah. Hard to say. I said it's not that hard. You really could have, there's a test that's quite easily done to confirm that. But yeah, I don't. I think he's trying to go thinking that the rings are worn on this vehicle, on this one cylinder, and I just don't believe it. I just think that's just a lot of crap. And so he's got the tests he's done are subpar, and I think what he has done is proven nothing.
To seal, an engine is basically a giant air pump. It sucks in air, then it burns it with gasoline, and then it shoves the burnt gas out the exhaust. So it's actually a giant air pump that instead of you pumping it, it's pumping the energy by burning gasoline. And when the compression of one is 40 pounds less than the other, there's wear inside. You'd have to rebuild the engine either way. It doesn't really matter. And in these, a lot of guys won't touch these engines because they say they're not rebuildable. There's too much money needs to be put in them to run them right. Unfortunately, he's got a worn engine here. Now, it is changing the fuel trim quite a bit.
No, it's not. It's changing a little bit, but I wouldn't say quite a bit. It's still within tolerances. But I don't think it's down to a worn engine, and certainly not just on one cylinder on the front. I do think there's definitely something else wrong with this vehicle, but Scotty's now going to proceed to show us that this coolant, that this in-tank fuel injector cleaner will miraculously fix this vehicle or make it run better.
So we're going to try one thing. We're going to try Bernie's fuel cleaner. It's amazing stuff. Then we'll see what the fuel trim is after we take it on about a half-hour drive. Bernie's stuff isn't a miracle, but it works quite well for cleaning. It's not going to fix a totally worn-out engine, but this fuel injector cleaner, we're going to see if the fuel trims change after we drive it around and make it run a little bit better. Because like I said, it's the idle that you feel it. On the highway, you don't feel anything. Runs perfectly good. It's just the problem that's starting up. It's not going to fix the compression of the engine, but on the other hand, this is a secondary vehicle for him. see with the thing on the top, he's using it to carry a camper. Now, unfortunately, the camper weighs like 7,000 pounds. He should have got the V8 with it. He's got the 6. But it's not something that he's going to be driving 20,000 miles a year. If he can baby it along, and he also isn't taking it to go camping in California from Massachusetts either. So, you keep it local, you never know. But we're going to see if Bernie's cleaner at least makes it stop running so rich on that #1 side. Okay, now our ride is up. Seems to be running so much smoother. We get the data and see what happened. Okay, now, realize one thing. It's kind of a toy. He uses it to take his camper to the beach. Now, he goes from like Fall River to Horseshoe Bay and stuff. All short drives, 20, 30 miles. It's not that far. He just wants something that's going to last, and it runs good. Gets like 25 miles a gallon on the highway. Still running good. Let's see if Bernie's cleaner changed the fuel trim at all to make it run less rich on bank #1. And lo and behold,
Now, I do find this suspicious is that now he is suddenly using a completely different scan tool to show live data. And probably even looks like maybe even a lower quality scan tool. Now, I do kind of find that suspicious because sometimes different scan tools will read the live data, especially aftermarket ones, will read it differently. And really for continuity and the show and for clarity and stuff like that, you really should have used the same scan tools, that it's reading the data and interpreting it the same way, and you show a comparison. Because you use a completely different one, I am highly suspicious on just how accurate this is and how transparent Scotty's being, because I don't think he is. I think that one, he's hooked up a much more quicker, easier OBD reader to clear the codes. And then when you clear the codes, it sets all the data back to 0, the adapters and everything, and then it'll start changing again. And depending on what you've done from resetting it there to the point where you're actually reading it, then it may the numbers will start being for that is. Now if he's only to start up and sitting there idling, and it's going to show a different number until it's driven, and then what happens is that the fuel trims then will start changing and adapting, and then also how it warms the engine. A warmer engine will run more efficient or run differently than compared to cold engines, and then how long the engine's been sat there, and how's it been run, how's it been idling, has it been running higher RPM, and also the cleaner will actually change your fuel trims a little bit because you added a different cleaner in there, and it sometimes those injector cleaners can cause fuel trims to be a little bit more. They can be a little bit richer, leaner, and tend to be a little bit richer because it actually changes the octane level of the fuel and causes it to burn differently. So I am very dubious on this from just him using a completely different scan tool. That how transparent and accurate are these numbers? And I'm going to say probably not as accurate as you think they are. I think there's a bit of deception going on here.
And behold, check it out. A long-term fuel trim of bank 1 that was subtracting like 6% fuel is now subtracting 1.6%.
This is drive home my point a little bit more. Did you notice the fuel trims of bank 2? Now, in the last vehicle, on the last scan tool on the same vehicle, they were at 1. Now they're positive 2.3. So I think I'm onto something there. There's something dubious going on here. I don't know if it's the scan tool that is interpreting the data differently, or if it's the cleaner he's put in. But he's claiming it's oh look, it's secured this vehicle. It's making it run. Is the data something is running? It's running richer. It went from what was it, -6 to now -1, but then bank 2 has gone from being +1 to plus 2.3. So like I said, there's something dubious. There's some deception going on here, and to all those folks out there who aren't trained technicians like myself who don't spot these little things, you're going, he's trying to fool you, and that's exactly what he does. He's been doing it for a very, very long time, for many, many years. I've looked back on those old videos, and it's very clear that there's just these. If he doesn't know, he's making stuff up, or or if it's an obvious he can't fix it, he just simply blames it on the vehicle, and that's not the case. I think 99% of the time, it's the fact that it's beyond his abilities and his knowledge, because it is so limited that he is simply just fobbing it off that, oh, it can't be fixed, it can't be fixed. But I would guarantee that it probably went down to the local shop somewhere, and some fella who's probably been in the industry for 5 or 6 years, but is actually trained and knows what he's doing and works on these things day in, day out, and actually has formal training and knowledge, is probably fix the vehicle dead easy, and the customer's gone off happy as can be. And if you do notice, Scotty doesn't really have any return customers. You'll see one vehicle come, and you never see that same vehicle come back again. There's a reason for that, and most likely it's because those vehicles go on to get fixed by somebody else somewhere, and then they don't come back because, other than the only person that ever comes back to Scotty is his son, and probably because his son's like, they're visiting and lets dad tinker in his car for a bit, and then goes and probably fixes it himself somewhere else. But yeah, there's definitely something dubious and deceptive there, and that kind of drives home my point right there. Now suddenly Bank 2 field trims have changed as well. Oh, look at that! Oh, look at that! They've gotten worse. Holy crap! Hey, they've gotten even vehicles running, even it's adding fuels, running leaner on Bank 2. Holy crap! Wonder why.
Percent fuel. Instead of subtracting 6% fuel, now it's minus 1.6. And granted, we only drove the thing around for like 40, 45 minutes. Might get better as time goes on. He could always upgrade it if he wanted, but for his $5,000, hey, it's running good. He knows now what the misfire is. He doesn't have to start tearing his hair out looking for this or that. It's just because the engine is worn more on cylinder number 1, but
so he still believes that just only that one cylinder out of 6 of them is worn out much more, and that's just simply it. He's just going, yeah, it's worn out, engine's worn out. He actually hasn't diagnosed. Once again, he has diagnosed the problem correctly, and in fact, he kind of glosses over, doesn't even go to the fact is that while he thinks he's cured it on cylinder bank number 1, he's kind of not even clocked on to the fact that number 2 is actually bank 2 is actually now running is running worse. It's now more lean, and it's adding fuel on bank 2 and subtracting only a little bit on bank 1. But that's only what that data is showing on that particular scan tool, and it's a different one than what he was showing previously, and so it's most likely being interpreted differently, as it's another aftermarket scan tool that's going to probably see that data in a slightly different way. And that's the problem. And I honestly don't know why he's gone and switched that. Well, I actually do know why he's gone and done that, because it shows a difference, so he can claim he's done a fix. He hasn't fixed anything, and I said I highly doubt that's actually even fixing anything. I think if you went and drove that vehicle a little bit longer, or actually maybe if you hadn't just gone and just cleared the data, that's probably what most likely he's done, is that he's plugged that in, erased the DTCs, which will reset all the adapters back, and then he's gone straight into live data and gone, oh look, I fixed it. He hasn't fixed it. It's just that live data hasn't gone all the way. It hasn't gone through a full drive cycle yet, and that's what's going on. And it's different scan tool, and it probably hasn't gone through full drive cycle yet. It's still moving. It's still, the computer's still having to relearn because you've reset everything back to 0 again. So, yeah, you need to watch it out there, people. There's people out there like Mr. Kilmer who they talk a good game, make you think that they know everything, and really, unfortunately, don't. You're being deceived, people. But hey, You got people like me, wonder mind here. I only try to tell you the truth. I make sure that clue you into this stuff. Um, I'm not seeing anybody. I have nothing against Mr. Kilmer, nothing personal against him. I just don't like the fact is that he claims things that is inaccurate, and that he betrays himself in a way that is deceptive and makes honest, trained technicians like myself who work hard, who keep our training up to date, who know our stuff properly. He tries to claim that we're deceiving and that we rip people off, and that's really not the case in the industry. Most mechanics are are hardworking, honest folk who are just trying to do our job well and want to have return customers who are happy and give piece of get word of mouth is some of the best advertising we can have. Um, every mechanic wants to have customers. Don't want to have a return, but we want to have return customers. We want customers that come back that are happy, that trust us, that know if I say, hey, look, you're going to need a head gasket in this vehicle, that I love to have my customers. They go, yeah, okay, do it, because they know I'm going to tell them the truth. I'm not going to BS them. If it says it needs it, because it needs it. I'll tell them, look, it needs this. It needs to do it now because this is going to happen. This can wait till next year. It's not worn out, but it's going to wear out. It's on its way. But it can wait. This can wait a few months, or no, you're fine for that, and that, or this is what you need to do to fix this and make it right, and without any kind of BS. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, click the like button, and I will be seeing you next time. Thanks for watching, and see you again.